Ed and I met in first grade. We went to school, all through school together. We graduated together. I was a little bit more sociable than you were.
A little bit, a lot.
And but I have to tell you, he was the best-looking boy in our class. So I'm telling you this.
It's a good thing I didn't know it.
Yeah, I know it. So anyway, we grew up in Plymouth, but Kingston was really part of our life too, because we grew up when, I think we were like in 5th grade when World War II started. So why don't you tell me about
World War II? Well, we lived during the Depression, and it was a very restricted time, and everything was in the neighborhood. Nobody had any money to speak of. So then World War II happened, and things really tightened up.
Nobody had cars.
Almost nobody had cars because they could walk to the cottage company or any other place that they worked. They didn't have the money, didn't have the cars because of the Depression.
And they had no
during
school
World War
buses.
II, no new cars were made, no new houses were built, no new nothing was built. Things were repaired.
That's right.
And they were getting worn out from the Depressions, but anyway, it worked. There were restrictions, and this applied to Kingston as well as to Plymouth. It was universal. Gasoline was rationed. Some foods were rationed.
Yeah, you had to have stamps. Remember, we had to have stamps for food. You got to
ration. There were coupons and little tokens. I have a token somewhere, and I don't remember where it is.
Well, we had a
35-mile-an-hour speed limit. That was throughout the country.
That was
to save gasoline and tires, and there were blackouts at night. We had to have, all the houses and buildings had to have blackout curtains. And that meant even the edges of the windows couldn't show light. My father-in-law was one of the night wardens in Plymouth, in our area of Plymouth, and they walked around. He had a helmet, one of these nightsticks, and a handgun. And if anybody violated that, they would tap the door, and things would be taken care of within hours. And yet, with all those restrictions, we lived, I think, a good life.
Oh, we did. I mean, well, in those days, the culture was different. You never disrespected an adult. You just followed the rules. We could go out and play in the woods, and we didn't have to worry about any sort of bad thing happening to us. So we lived a very safe life as children.
Yes, very.
You know, and it was a fun thing. You played games. There was, we didn't even have a television until I think I was in high school, I think, when we got a television. So you played with your neighborhood friends.
Within the neighborhood, yes.
And you would, even the older ones would have games where they were in charge of races, and it was just like one big family. And if you misbehaved, your neighbor would punish you just like your own mother would. You know, you knew that somebody was always watching out for you, which was wonderful. And going on, like I had said earlier, that I was a little more social, so when I became a teenager, I traveled more for entertainment. There was a diner called Skippy's that is now behind it's a restaurant there now, and it's behind Cumberland Farms, and that was the in place to go as a teenager. And then there was Tassie's Restaurant, that was a marvelous place, and now the CVS is there. So we lost a lot of things. Now, my earliest recollection of Kingston, to get anywhere, you had to go through Kingston. Mm-hmm. If you want to go to Boston, you had to go through Kingston. If you want to go to Hanson or Bridgewater, and my father had friends in Hanson, so I used to, we would drive like on a Sunday, and there was, I have a picture of it, there was a tree over by where the Catholic Church is that had 4 trunks joining and going up, and it made like a little bridge. And I remember tormenting my father to stop because I had to go through that tree. So finally he did. And then he had a hard time getting me back into the car because it was unbelievable. It was like a fairy thing, this wonderful tree. And I think in 1945, I have pictures when they were removing it. And another big thing for me was across the street now where Stop and Shop is, there was this ice cream place. It was called Parker's Ice Cream. And it had a huge milk bottle, and of course that attracted me. And one other thing was, there was a gas station where Kentucky Chicken is now, and it was made like a crown, and it was called Old King Cole, and those were the 3 biggest things. I was about 5 years old that made Kingston a magical place for me. So. And then...
Now you got around much younger than I did into Kingston. I didn't get into Kingston until just before I graduated from high school. And I have some outstanding memories about that. In those days, elm trees had been planted many years before, and going through Main Street where the churches are in Kingston, yeah. They were vase-like shaped, and at the top, they almost created a tunnel effect. And it's burned into my memory.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
It was unusual,
like
to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the first time I went through there, three of we boys from Plymouth. One of them I knew one of the girls in Kingston, so we went by there and we met them. It ends up that two of us married, one each of the girls, and the other one, I don't know what happened to her. So that was my memory. But I spent time going to Kingston back and forth after that. Then I had to go in the Army, so I took care of that for a while.
Now, Kingston had, well, as a group of kids, there was no competition between Kingston and Plymouth because Kingston was too little for us sport-wise. So we were just like one big family of friends. And they'd come, the only movie theater was in North Plymouth, so you'd meet a lot of Kingston people. And then also, then the big thing was that the drive-in came in about 1950 or so. And that is, the drive-in theater was where the Stop and Shop Mall is now. And before that, it was the Kingston Dump. And I have a picture too. There was a big whale that they found and they buried it there. So it was a dump before it was. then it became
That's true.
the drive-in theater, and of course for teenagers that was
Yeah.
a big attraction. And yeah, most of the time we knew. Well, I did. I knew quite a few of the Kingston people, and they were part of North Plymouth, and Kingston was almost like one area. The Rocky Nook area was a big attraction for our boys because there was a lot of pretty girls that used to settle there. I don't think I was involved in that part, but let's see. Oh, I moved here. I think the two biggest things for me, change-wise, is that the traffic. When I first moved here, the expressway in 1960 was just opening, so Kingston had very little traffic. In fact, my son was born in 1962, and I used to wheel him in a carriage, and my cat used to follow us. That's how little traffic there was. And the second biggest thing is the big change, and I have a big meadow in my yard and a brook, and the change of animals. I used to have pheasants and quail in my yard. I used to have all kinds of beautiful birds, meadowlarks, all like orioles, none that I see now. My yard was full of turtles. Fishermen used to come and catch trout in the brook too. Mm-hmm. And we had foxes, and now I get turkeys in my yard that are not welcome. I get coyotes in my yard, and we always had deer.
Squirrels.
So that type of thing has changed quite a bit as far as I'm concerned.
There was one thing I liked about Kingston an awful lot. We came from North Plymouth, even though we're at the end, near exit 7. When we got down into the main street, businesses, houses, everything was buildings, gas stations and stuff like that. Well, Kingston had a lot of roads, a lot of stretches with just plain trees. A cluster of a house here, a cluster there. It was like the frontier, in effect. It was like the frontier. And it was, when I had an opportunity to move, after I had got married and we decided we'd move, I said, well, Kingston would be an ideal place. I liked it. And meanwhile, the woman I married had already moved to Kingston. But it was wide open space in a very quiet town, and it still is a very quiet town.
And this area was a cow pasture.
This was a cow pasture at that time. You could see the Jones River at that time. There were no trees down here. And I'm on a pasture too. A very, very nice area. And there's elderly housing here, senior housing here. Don't even know they're there. Very quiet, very orderly.
We got married in '56, and Kingston, and I had a job. I was a teacher, the art teacher in Plymouth, and he was the art teacher in Stoughton. So we figured Kingston would be a good, a good point. And because I wanted to be near the ocean, so it was nice that way. And that's how we chose Kingston, and I never regretted it. I just love it here. It's a beautiful town. It was a beautiful place to bring your children up. And I'm still involved with the arts. Now I donate my time and I teach oil painting to the senior citizens. So a lot of good things have happened here. I love it here.
And my experience after I got out, shortly after I got out of high school, the Korean War was on, and I was going to be drafted. And instead, I enlisted in the Army for 3 years. which was probably the best thing I ever did, because I was stationed in Japan and then end up in Korea. Came back, and my father owned a restaurant, ran a restaurant on Standish Avenue in Plymouth. And no sooner did I got back, within a matter of months he died. So I had to take over the business for 6 years. So that would be my first job, civilian job. After, by the way, I went on, I did my college on extension courses. I did 3 years, I did 4 years to get a degree. I did my 4 years worth in 3 years to get my degree in teaching. And I got my first job, teaching job, was in Kingston. And then later on I went to Pembroke. Job-wise, that's pretty much it.
And you were principal.
Then I retired.
He was a principal. You were a principal.
Well, that's when I moved to Pembroke. Yes, I got a principalship.
Yeah. And I taught, I mentioned that, I guess I started teaching in Plymouth. And then my husband became head of the whole art department in the town of Kingston. I mean, excuse me, of Plymouth. Mm-hmm. And then when I had my child, I just left for 10 years. Then I had my daughter. And then I went back and I split a job with a girl. And it worked out great because I had plenty of time with I worked 2.5 days a week. So my very first job I ever had when I was in high school was I was a telephone operator. Mm-hmm. And where you actually had a switchboard and you had to connect the cords.
Number, please.
Yeah, yeah. And that was my first job. My husband had a whole lot of jobs. He used to drive the swan boats in Boston. And in fact, there was a picture of him in some geography book that he was on the swan boat.
Oh, good.
And then he got romantic one time when we were going together, and he took me out all by myself at night. It was a moonlit night, and the swan boats. So,
it's thinking back, and I've researched this. After the Second World War, which ended in 1945, the population of Kingston was less than 3,000 people, and almost nothing happened population-wise until 1960, and that's when the Southeast Expressway was completed, and that. Then people started to settle in Kingston as well as the other areas too. Yeah. Started here because other than that we were a crossroads. And then when the commuter rail was put in with the place up, what do you call it? The
industrial park? No. Oh,
wait, yeah. What do you call that? You know, it goes under the highway and goes up there. Commuter rail station, I call it. Yeah. And that then boosted the growth in Plymouth. I'm sorry, in Kingston. For some reason, people didn't move to Kingston until much later than the Second World War. And they moved a lot to Plymouth for some reason. I guess it was more of a draw for them.
Yeah.
And it was good. I was kind of happy about that.
Well, Plymouth used to be all woods. We had Plymouth and North Plymouth. There was no such thing as West Plymouth or any of those things.
Not in
it was
those
all
days,
woods,
yeah.
And now it's a big area, houses all over the place.
Yeah, something I remember very well with my kids. I had 3 boys, and the Silver Lake Regional School District was the high school, the Silver Lake Regional High School, was built around when I got out of the Army in 1955, and I think that spring it opens up. And Violet mentioned earlier that Kingston was so small that we had very little connection with Plymouth and the other towns because some of them were bigger than us. But when they got into Silver Lake, they shared a larger entity, if I'll call it that, equally with people from Pembroke, Halifax, and Plimpton.
Yeah.
And they liked that. They felt more with the greater community, and I think it really was a good thing that happened for the kids in particular.
Yeah, in fact, like I mentioned, we never played sports because even Duxbury was too small for Plymouth.
Yes.
But then the rivalry began with, after like the Thanksgiving Day game was always Silver Lake versus Plymouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of hard because I was a cheerleader in Plymouth. It was kind of hard for me to be too loyal to Kingston. That's the only time I was still a Plymouth person when it came to that game. Cheer for Plymouth. So, and when I went back to teaching, I used to teach there art. So 2.5 days a week, I split the job. And so my children could walk to school. They could take their bicycles and go to Reed Community Building. During the summer, it was like a recreational area. And, you know, they had plenty of friends in the neighborhood. In fact, across the street, past now Cancun Restaurant, that was one great big estate that went all the way to the Jones River. And what's the name of the family? The Holmes family. There was a beautiful, beautiful, the whole thing was one great big estate, and you can still see one of the entrances is across the street from me, and then the other one is close to the Jones River. They still kept the rounded part. Now it's all streets in there. But I remember as a child, I must have been about 10 years old. My sisters, my older sisters, were friends with the Peary's family, and they had a big, big farm that was right near there. I guess the properties abutted, and no one was living in the house at the time, but they did have a caretaker. And of course, you know, I found my way there. And there was a beautiful, I mean, I was just 10, but I appreciated. There was a mahogany cow barn. And what I was so fascinated with was each cow had its own drinking fountain. And if they put their nose on this little lever, it would fill with water, and then they'd drink it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, because we probably touched every single one. And then I never found pictures of it, though, but there has to be someone who has pictures of the estate. By the time I moved to Kingston, Mel Lagudi had bought and just did that whole development, River Street and Center Street and all those streets. Mm-hmm. So I was the fairy queen. I put on fairy parties in my yard. That always were in the newspaper. I'd have always the August full moon. I did it for over 20 years. And there'd be 20 little girls, half of them I didn't even know. There would be people asking. I had, and everybody had to come dressed as a fairy. And I would, it was wonderful. It was a magical thing. My yard was all luminaries and white lights. And like the children, even to this day, they now have children of their own. They're probably grandmothers now. And they always, that's what I wanted to do, because, and I wanted all the children to have a real a real good childhood memory. So I did that, and it was wonderful. I loved it. So, and then I'm a volunteer every place. I volunteer at the senior center. I'm the president of the Richard Sparrow House. Well, that isn't Kingston, that's Plymouth. And then the Kingston Cemetery, which is, if you've never been there, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous cemetery. And in fact, there was an article years and years ago about the most beautiful cemeteries in New England, and they mentioned the Evergreen Cemetery. And it was the only cemetery at that time that was actually designed by an architect. What was his name? His with an O. And it's sort of circular, and it's just that old part, you couldn't beat it. It's got a mirror pond in there that's shaped just like a heart. It's a beautiful cemetery. So, and I'm on the board of directors there, so I still stay in touch.
I never got involved in politics. I'm just not political type, and I did some volunteering for the church and so forth. I did Sunday school,
Yeah,
and
that's right, I did too.
chaperoned large groups with other chaperones.
With the Boy Scouts, you were very involved.
I did
with
Boy
the Boy
Scouts. That's right. I did.
was too. I was a den mother. I forgot that.
Yeah, I remember that.
No,
Yeah.
well, you were very
The boy-
involved with them. You'd
Yeah,
take them
yeah.
camping.
Yes, we did. In fact, I went with them, and we climbed Mount Washington by foot. And I'm talking about through Mount Eisenhower and back again. The presidential range, we did most of it.
Where?
New Hampshire.
Oh, New Hampshire. Oh,
Yeah, I
Mount
did that
Washington.
too with
Oh,
them.
yeah. Okay, that's right.
Boy, they
yeah.
pushed me for all I was worth.
Yeah,
But I'd already come out of the Army, so I was in shape.
yeah. Cottage company was extremely, even before World War II, because when immigrants came over at that time, you had to be sponsored by a person. And then most of them started working right at the cottage company until they could move another place. And that cottage company was amazing. There's streets and streets in Plymouth that they're called the cottage houses because they would build it for the workers that came in, and then they provided them with everything. There was the most beautiful library, and there was a big hill that they took down, and the library sat on top of it. And as a child, because a lot of the Kingston kids used to come to the library too, that lived by, by the seaside over the line.
The luring reading room.
And that place I used to consider magical because I liked books anyway. But
Yes.
they had all these clocks that would chime, and they fixed them so the main rooms would start, and then you'd hear, when that was done, you'd hear one way on this side, because it had different areas, and then way on the other side. And then they had, the first time, because I was little when I started going there, it was like a drinking fountain, but it came up like a bubbler, and see, things that you think of. And that to me, whoa, that was such a magical thing that you could just reach over and get a drink from a stream.
Where was it located? I don't remember seeing it.
You don't remember seeing it?
No,
as you come into the library.
Yes.
It was over on the left-hand side. It was in that little vestibule before you got into the great big library itself.
It was the luring reading room, I believe it was called, and it was taken down, and part of it was moved across the street to the Lutheran church. A treasure. It really is a treasure. It was nice they saved part of it.
Yeah, because it had beautiful fireplace, and they had one wing was the children's library, and
Yes,
the
I
other
remember
wing
that.
was. But well, I'm the type of person who looks for magical things.
I know you do.
That's what fascinated me, was hearing those. In fact, I'd always time it so I would get there when the chimes would be going off. And yeah, and yeah, you were talking about the cottage. It was a very, and then they had their own library. They had their own, like a little medical center where they had what you would call like a, more than a nurse, like a nurse physician.
A clinic, it was like a clinic.
Yeah,
yeah.
And whether your parents worked in the cottage or not, it didn't matter, because it was free to anyone that wanted to go there. And then they had this wonderful dining area, and then they had a hall for entertainment. They had, like the Girl Scouts would meet there, but they'd have their plays and stuff and all kinds of good things. Harris Hall it was called. And, you know, it was really a big, big part of Plymouth. And Kingston, the lower end of Kingston. Yeah, because everybody used to work there.
That cottage company was quite an operation. It ran around the clock, 7 days a week, 3 different shifts. And when the shift left out, there would be policemen who would block the road to North Plymouth so they could drive. Those that had the vehicles could drive where they wanted. And most, I would say, don't know about most, a lot of them walked. And the police had to control that so that they could safely cross the street. Not that there was much traffic, but around the clock.
Yeah. In fact, during World War II, 3 of my sisters worked there because they didn't have any men. And, right, so it was, 3 shifts or 4?
3 shifts.
3 shifts. And Sundays,
round the clock.
Yeah, it was just, the war depended on them.